Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Independent Thought. My name is Desmond Price. For those of you who are not familiar with the show or this is your first time here, welcome. And to all my subscribers, welcome back. Thank you for sticking with me through another episode of this show. Now, it's been about a month or so since I've actually sat down to record an episode, so I might be a little bit rusty, so kind of bear with me. I will also say that I apologize for getting this episode out a day late. I'll mention reasons why at the end of this episode for those who are interested. But first, before we go any further into this topic of discussion, I first want to note some of the sources for this episode. That will be ABC, CBS, NPR, The Washington Post, Breaking Points, and independent journalist Jonah Furman, who I highly recommend, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Today, we are talking about all of the strikes happening around the country right now, which has been cleverly dubbed Striketober. This is something that I've been following now for a few weeks. But actually, to be a little more accurate, I've been following this since about April, when the first strike that I heard of happening this year happened down in Alabama. But so let's just talk about what's going on right now. There are so many strikes happening in the country right now. And while that's happening, the media was largely ignoring this up until this past week when John Deere had announced that a lot of its workers had gone on strike. And now that that has happened, it seems as though that is getting plenty of coverage around the country. But still, there are so many strikes that are happening around the country that I really want to bring some focus to now, and some of the reasons why I think that they're happening. So first and foremost, before we dive into the specifics, a lot of the information that I've gotten for this episode has come either directly from or somewhat tied to one journalist named Jonah Furman, who has basically been single-handedly keeping track of damn near every strike or potential strike that's happening all over the country. You can find this journalist on Twitter. It seems like he is a part of a company called Labor Notes. I highly recommend him if you are interested in this subject and wanting to know all the different nuances going on with these strikes around the country. So let me set the stage a little bit. There is this John Deere strike happening right now. And that's the one that's being highly publicized, and rightly so. 10,000 workers at 14 different plants across the states of Iowa, Illinois, Kansas, Colorado, and Georgia have gone on strike. They are striking for a multitude of reasons. The Washington Post actually went out and spoke with some of the workers who were on strike in Iowa. And one worker in particular said that, they've been wanting to get some of the wages they feel like they lost back from years ago, but they felt like they never had the right opportunity in order to collectively, I guess, like come together and truly hold the line as they feel like they do right now, with the labor market being what it is, where there's such a worker shortage. They feel like they have a stance of power currently that they just like have not had in a long time, if ever. And so John Deere, rightfully so, getting a lot of coverage, but there are strikes happening all over this country. And I just want to briefly mention them in case you haven't heard about them and you want to hear a little bit more about them. I definitely recommend going and checking some of these out. So here is some of the strikes happening around the country. There are 50 machinists on strike in West Virginia, and these people are on strike asking because they want better wages. They feel like they're not being paid enough. There are 75 symphony musicians on strike in Texas, who again are on strike because management wanted to cut full-time workers in half and bring on part-time workers for less pay. There is 100 teachers currently on strike in Pennsylvania. There's 100 bus drivers on strike in Maryland, and then 200 in Nevada as well. And again, these bus drivers are asking for higher wages and more professionalism, but we'll talk on that a little bit later in the episode. There's 300 aerospace manufacturers on strike in California, 350 janitors in Colorado, 420 whiskey workers in Kentucky. And get this, these whiskey workers, for instance, they're going on strike. And one of the reasons why they said was because the company is asking them to start working 7 days a week, and they want to cut their overtime as well as raise their health insurance premiums, which that is 7 days a week. I don't know. I can't even wrap my head around it. There are 450 steel workers in West Virginia who are on strike, 400 hospital workers in Oregon who again were complaining about wages, staff shortages, and potential outsourcing of their jobs. There are additionally 700 nurses in Massachusetts, as well as 1,100 coal miners down in Alabama. And I've referenced these coal miners in my previous episode called Boycotting Oreos. Please go back and check out that episode for a little bit more detail on these coal miners. There's also 1,400 workers at Kellogg who are on strike. And this is happening in 4 different states, in Michigan, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. Now, these Kellogg workers are also, again, going on strike because of low wages, common theme here, bad company culture, and again, 7-day work weeks. Kellogg is asking some of these workers to work 7 days in a row. One worker was quoted as saying that he had worked 120 days in a row without a day off. How is that even legal? Like, I think I mentioned this before in my Boycotting Oreos episode. We were talking about some of the things that were happening to Frito-Lay workers, where they were having to deal with these, what they call like suicide shifts. I do not understand how we have failed workers in this country that someone can work 120 days in a row and there's no law against that. We should maybe be addressing the fact that there's no law against that. So let me continue here for a second. There's 2,000 telecom workers on strike in California. 2,000 carpenters were on strike in Washington. I think that's now been settled. There's 2,000 hospital workers in New York, in the Buffalo area. And now 24,000 workers, hospital workers, that are part of Kaiser Permanente out of California, Oregon, and Hawaii that are now going on strike. The companies that employed these workers said that, well, these workers are some of the highest paid in their profession, and they didn't see a reason to pay them more. The workers, one of the workers in particular, was speaking with a local ABC affiliate out of California and said that all they wanted was to be paid the same as the hospital workers were getting in Southern California, because these workers were in Northern California. But that the hospitals in Northern California wouldn't offer them the same wage that they had in Southern California, but they did offer them 11 cents an hour more, which they found to be insulting, therefore strike. Now, there was 60,000 workers of a group called IATSE, which is Hollywood crew members, lighting, people who work with scripts, people who work camera crew, cinematographers, so on and so forth. They have currently said they're not going on strike, but they have not accepted their new contract yet. So there's a chance they might be going on strike. And this is also coming on the backs of Frito-Lay in Kansas, which was resolved a couple months ago, and Nabisco, which was resolved about a couple months ago. And Frito-Lay was out of Kansas. Nabisco was in Oregon, Illinois, Georgia, New Jersey. I just listed off a bunch of different things. And if I kept your attention through all that, thank you. But I think the reason why I wanted to list this all out was because it is absolutely incredible to me that we have not seen a strike wave like this in this country in decades. This is truly remarkable. Labor reporters across the country are going wild right now, trying to keep track of all of it. As I'm speaking on this episode, there are actually more strikes that might be popping up as I was reading through Jonah Furman's Twitter feed just earlier today. So as I'm putting out this episode, this information might already be a little bit dated because there might be more strikes happening around the country right now. Workers are in a unique situation of power currently. And there's a few things at play here that I want to talk about. But first, let me just acknowledge this leverage because yes, everyone knows that the labor market is tight right now. No matter where you are in this country, everyone knows one thing, that's like mostly every business that you're looking at is probably looking for workers right now. In fact, I was in a local AutoZone here in Missoula, Montana, and a guy who I was in there to buy a car battery from asked me if I knew anyone who wanted a job. And I thought, just like, is that how desperate we are right now, that you're just asking random customers who comes in the store if they know people who are looking for work? I'm like, yeah, buddy, I think everyone's looking for work right now. Well, I mean, all of you employers are looking for work anyway. But yeah, there's a lack of workers right now. And who's to say what the exact reasoning is for that? I mean, I think it's different for so many different people. During the pandemic, a lot of people had to, more or less find different ways to stay afloat, especially when so many things got shut down. Some people turned to online work, some people became self-employed, some people just learned how to live on less. And so who's to say what the different reasons are for it? But I got to tell you, the one thing that we know for sure is that this whole, get back to work mentality that certain states have employed have not really bore the fruit that they thought it was going to. I think it was, about half the states in our country ended unemployment insurance earlier than the federal deadline. So the federal deadline was going to run out the unemployment insurance on September 30th. But 25 states across this country, coincidentally, I think they were all red states with Republican governors, decided to end benefits in either June or July. And from all the data they've collected since then, that has done literally nothing. And so that attempt to get people back into the workforce just hasn't really translated. That wasn't obviously the reason that people were staying out of the workforce. Obviously, unemployment checks weren't the reason why people didn't want to go back to work. But, I might offer a different, alternative here. And I'm going to provide a little bit of little data before we go further. One thing that should also be kept in mind when it comes to this story, and we're going to get a little off track here, but I promise we'll get back, is that workers across this country are kind of just fed up with how things are going, truthfully, for a multitude of reasons. But we are seeing a wave of what I would like to think of as worker empowerment for the first time in my lifetime. In August of this year, 4.3 million people quit their job. And that is according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That was the most in any 1 month in the last 2 decades. In the last 2 decades. It's not just happening in any one market. It was happening in restaurants, in hospitality, in manufacturing, in retail jobs, in white collar jobs. It is happening across the board. There was no culturalness to it. There was not like a state by state thing to it. There was no like political thing to it. This was happening in every little pocket of America. And so you couldn't like fit this into one neat box, or it's, oh, these lazy people over here, or these lazy people over there. I think working class people are just kind of tired of dealing with all of the crap that comes with some of these lower paying jobs, these low wage jobs. And, let me say, for the remaining people who are in the workforce, and I'm seeing this, across every customer service place that I go into right now, a lot of the workers who are left over in these jobs are having to work longer hours. They're having to work, shorter staffed, and it feels like customers are having less and less patience with them. I would hope that whoever's listening to this, you're not one of those people who's, been impatient with customer service people who are doing their absolute best to make do with this situation, being what it is. But if you happen to see somebody else in one of these places, like a restaurant, for instance, being rude with staff because their stuff isn't coming up fast enough, maybe we should all be speaking up a little bit and telling those rude people to shut the hell up. As working class people are dealing with this situation the best way that they can. Is the people who are having to deal with all of these shortages all over the country right now. But I want to come back and just speak to people who lost their jobs last year, because I think that's part of the story as well. There were so many people who lost their jobs at the beginning of the pandemic, and then they were promised jobs to come back to. Some of them did not. Some of them had to make hard transitions into different places, and some of them never got their jobs back whatsoever. I mean, we still haven't gotten back to the unemployment rate that we were at prior to March of 2020. And so I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that when you lay a bunch of people off, when you, and sometimes in these situations you probably didn't have to, it's not all that surprising to me when some people decide not to come back to their jobs. Especially in this particular market where, people are coming back to these just same like crappy wages that they were having before. And to be fair, some companies have risen their wages, and we've heard stories about that all over the place. I know that Target raised their wage up. I know that some fast food places are paying more than they used to, but in a lot of parts of this country, people are still being underpaid versus the cost of living where they're at. And truthfully, they're kind of disrespected at their jobs. And that's really what it comes down to. I think I was reading an article in the Washington Post, and they were speaking with a woman who said that she had quit her job in August. She was one of these 4.3 million people who quit their job in August. And she had chronicled the fact that she worked 90 hours a week during the height of the pandemic last year. 90 hours a week. And then she found out just recently that her job was about to be outsourced. And so she literally like could not imagine how she said that she was putting her health on the line. She felt like she was putting her life on the line, working, like during the height of the pandemic, and just, being a customer service worker, working her ass off for a company, and then to find out that they're just going to essentially outsource her job to a person in another country anyway. Like that is awful. I mean, like, truthfully speaking, it's awful. And it kind of comes back to what I said earlier, that we would get back to the bus drivers. The bus drivers in Maryland who are currently on strike, one of the chief like issues that they were having, they said that they just don't feel like their employers actually respect them. I mean, the quote that I have here it says that one of the bus drivers who spoke to CBS said that we need to be appreciated. We need to be understood. We're professionals. We need to be treated and paid like professionals. And in this, again, when I was listening to members of the IATSE union talking about why that they were going on strike, it was a similar thing. They felt like they were disrespected, that they were underpaid, that they were being forced to work crazy hours to make up for all the production time that was lost, during the height of 2020, and when, COVID shut a lot of things down. And now they're being asked to work, 14, 15, 16 hours a day, just having crazy amounts of working, almost no breaks, and getting paid way below what is a cost of, a living wage in California. And they just did not feel like these studios cared whatsoever. And this is while, again, studios making crazy amounts of profits, large actors getting crazy amounts of profits, but it's not trickling down to the workers. The workers are just not seeing any increases in their profits, in their wages. And on top of that fact, it feels as though whenever workers want to like eke out a little bit of dignity for themselves, they're just shit on. I mean, truthfully speaking. And this kind of goes back into the John Deere story a little bit. In Waterloo, Iowa, which is, the site of one of the John Deere plants, when a manager there heard that workers might consider going on strike, this is before it was actually authorized, plant managers there said that if the workers decided to go on strike, that the site would probably just close down and move somewhere else because, they just didn't want to deal with that. And so again, it's just another example of companies more or less saying like, yeah, you want to advocate for yourself, that's fine, but we're just going to go find workers somewhere else because we don't actually care about what it is that you want. We just want people to work for cheap and do what they're told to do. So here's the question that always comes up, because this gets debated, all the time when, we're listening to these news shows, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, people ask questions like, Well, do these workers, have the right to ask for more? Are they being paid enough? Like right now, there was an article, and I forget the news source, you have to forgive me on this one, which was commenting on the fact that John Deere workers get paid $60,000 to $70,000 a year, to which thankfully some of those workers reached out again to Jonah Furman and showed their pay stubs, and they said, like, that's not true whatsoever. Like, I've been working at John Deere for almost 2 decades and I get paid under 40K a year. And all things considered, working, getting 40K a year as your full-time job, not exactly that much money, I'm not going to lie to you, especially when the CEO of John Deere raised his own salary last year by 160% and raised the pay of his executives by between 20 and 192%. Now, this is all on the backs of John Deere making more money in their last fiscal year than in any other year in their company history. This was their most profitable year ever. Now, now, funny enough, side note, the same CEO, when he found out that these workers were going on strike, he actually went around and sold $72,000 worth of company stock that he owned. So I think that tells me all I need to know about where he thinks this is all heading. But there really isn't a whole lot of sympathy for a lot of these workers when I see mainstream coverage. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this today. I saw an article on CNN that was referencing a memo sent out by Goldman Sachs where they said low-wage workers are getting quote unquote eye-popping raises. And they noted in the article that like workers have gotten in the last calendar year about a 6% raise. And that's eye-popping. And that's like the most they've gotten in decades. And honestly, that should have been the focus there, that's the most they've gotten in decades. Like, I know that maybe 6% might seem like a whole lot, but it really isn't a whole lot. I got to tell you, it truly isn't. I mean, not compared to what you're talking about, how the billionaire class did last year, and so I have a quote here for you about how they did in the last year. So 20 million Americans, this is a quote, hold on, this is a quote, 20 million Americans lost their jobs in the pandemic. At the same time, roughly 650 billionaires in America saw their net worth increase by more than 1 trillion. And now they're worth more than 4 trillion, unquote. Now that quote was delivered to Congress by President Biden back at the end of April. So even Biden, who's not really a champion of the working class, yeah, I said it, acknowledges the fact that the working class is not really doing too hot, but billionaires seem to be doing pretty high. And according to Forbes' data, the numbers are actually a little bit higher than that. Total American billionaire wealth currently stands at 4.6 trillion. And that was at the end of April of this year. Now, by their count, that's up 35% since January of 2020. So in a little over a year, billionaire wealth in this country rose by 35%. But Goldman Sachs has the audacity to put out a memo saying that workers getting a 6% raise over the course of a year is eye-popping. It's eye-popping. What's eye-popping is the fact that 10% of Americans, the top 10% of Americans, own 89% of all US stocks. That's pretty eye-popping, which is also on the backdrop of the last administration doing nothing but constantly talking about how great the stock market was doing and how that was a true measure of how great our economy is doing. But can it be a true measure of how great the economy is doing if only 10% of Americans own like damn near 90% of the stocks? Is it really a true measure of the economy if it's so concentrated for one subset of people? That's just my take on it. But here, let's just like really just come down to earth with all this for a second and just level. Because even though some workers are getting paid a little bit more than they were before, it doesn't exactly close the gap. We're not that far removed from the 2020 primary season where like 4,000 Democrats were running for president. And the one thing that was consistent during that time was it seemed like the talking point that everyone wanted to run to was the fact that 40% of Americans could not afford a $400 emergency expense. One $400 emergency expense would have put 40% of the country into fucking bankruptcy. That was the reality for so many Americans. And so when I see these wages, when I see these workers asking for higher wages, I don't see a problem. I see just honestly what needs to happen. Companies across this country are making record profits right now. Billionaires are making record profits right now. There is no shortage of money that these companies are coming into contact with. John Deere, for instance, like we said before, is having their most profitable year of their entire existence. And people were having that level of struggles before the pandemic, and then tens of millions of people lost their jobs afterwards. And that's not including the fact that people had their hours cut on top of that. People had bills stack up. Even if you were able to pay your rent, maybe you had a couple months where you couldn't pay. So now you have back pay. You had other bills that got piled up. People are swimming in debt. It is about time that the working class of this country actually got a fucking raise. I'm sorry. And I'm glad. I am so glad that these workers around the country are finally seizing the moment, seizing the opportunity to carve out a little bit extra for themselves. They really should. They honestly really should. And that is my take-home message for everyone listening to this, is that there are so many people in this country who are getting underpaid for the work that they do. They're getting underpaid. They are not getting paid what their work is actually worth. And I truly am happy for these people that they're going on strike. I hope these strikes turn out well. I hope that it's not, for loss, because there's never a guarantee that things will work out. There's never a guarantee that these contracts will be what they're looking for, but I'm glad that they're at least standing up for themselves, because too many companies are getting away with paying their workers like crap, asking for ridiculous things, asking them to work 7 days a week, asking them to do so much extra stuff, and they're just not being compensated for it adequately. And so I guess my final call to action here as we're closing out this episode is, please, go out and share some of the information about some of these strikes going on. So many of the people that I have talked to, because I was fortunate enough to talk to a worker who's currently on strike at John Deere, and I was talking to another person who was a member of IATSE, and then another person who was married to one of the coal miners on strike. And one of the things that were echoed while speaking with them is that they were thankful that people were talking about this. They were thankful that people were willing to cover this. And so I ask you all now that if this subject has interested you, if you have sat through these last 25 minutes of me explaining this situation, please go find an article, share that article, follow Jonah Furman, who is that labor reporter that I was referenced a couple of times in this episode. Check up on some of the things that he has mentioned and share those things. More Perfect Union, who I keep talking about, share their videos. They're absolutely fantastic. They cover a lot of this stuff too. Share this episode. Please, let's get more people talking about this subject. Thank you so much to everyone who did take the time to listen to this. We are now going to transition to the next part of this episode, which will be my conversation with my guest. We will be having a brand new topic that will be different from this one currently. So please be aware that we're going to switch gears a little bit, but we're going to take a quick break. And after we come back, after a few words from our sponsors, we'll be there with our guest for the week. So stay tuned. Welcome back from the break, everyone. Thank you for sticking with me through this episode of Independent Thought. And so first, like I kind of teased in the beginning of the episode, I want to address why I was a little late today, or this week rather. So I unfortunately came, I want to rephrase this. I unfortunately had to deal with a broken tooth, which is incredibly painful. If you've never experienced a broken tooth before, I definitely do not recommend this. It's pretty awful. And so episode had to wait for about a day, so I do apologize about that. But thankfully, getting it out a day late is not the worst thing in the world. But I do appreciate all the subscribers who did reach out to me today and ask me why the episode wasn't out yet. It's good to know that people you know, are aware that Monday is the day that Independent Thought comes out, and they were wondering where it was. So I kind of appreciate the fact that some people checked in. Uh, Also, I probably going to be mentioning this a lot going forward. So if you get a little annoyed by me constantly mentioning it, just bear with me. But I am doing more things on my YouTube channel right now. I will be putting out a lot more content on YouTube as I try to have almost like two track podcast going forward. So there'll be stuff going on here and then stuff going on YouTube. So if you are not already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you are subscribed to the YouTube channel, please click the little bell, because I'm noticing that YouTube does a terrible job at letting people know when new videos drop. So if you click the bell, you get a little notification. There won't be a bunch of them. Don't worry, I don't post too much on there. So hopefully not a big deal. Now, what's coming up next with the podcast is we are going to be having a couple different episodes over the next week. I'm going to be having my candidate episode for the month of October. Will be coming out in a couple of days, so be on the lookout for that. I'll be having my sit down with candidate Daniel Wilson. Great episode. Definitely do not miss that. And I'll be having another episode coming next Monday, so be on the lookout for that as well. If you're not currently, please follow me on Instagram at Independent Thought. That is the best place to keep up with this podcast as far as updates and just day-to-day stuff. I post a lot in my stories, so that is a great place to keep up with what's going on with this podcast. And if you want to support Independent Thought, there is a Patreon link in this episode description. So please click into the subscription and you should see my link to my Patreon. I am getting very close to hitting my goal for the number of patrons that I was looking to get before the year was over. So please help me get there if you are not currently a member of the Patreon. And now, final thoughts on my first topic. I almost forgot. I apologize here. I forgot to thank my guest, Carly Hughes. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I completely forgot. And I definitely appreciate you taking the chance and coming on your Radical Friends podcast. So I definitely thank you for that. I hope that you don't get too much hate for coming on to a political podcast. But again, thank you for coming on and talking about the real estate market, and hopefully we'll be able to get you back on again in the future. But yeah, final thoughts on the subject from the first segment. Striketober is something that I first saw on Breaking Points, which is a great YouTube show that I watch. One of the best places to get news as far as I'm concerned. I'll probably be shouting them out for a long time. I first came across it because Crystal Ball, who's one of the co-hosts on that show, did a monologue on it a couple weeks ago, and I was floored because I had heard about the strikes in Alabama, Frito-Lay, Nabisco. I heard about all of them, but when I heard about all of the other ones that were going on, it just finally just hit me, just like the fact that there were so many people across the country who are finally more or less standing up for themselves, which is, something that really inspires me. It's the reason why I chose to cover that Amazon story back in season 3, which was earlier this year, about those workers who are trying to, become unionized down in Bessemer. And I truly feel like that is something that just needs to happen. Now, I know not all strikes end up with workers getting exactly what they want or getting anything, but I feel as though right now, if there was ever a time to mobilize and to I guess stand in solidarity, this is that moment. For as long as I can remember, it's been a take it or leave it situation with employers and employees. Employers had all the power in the world. They said like, hey, this is what it is. Either you're on board or you can get out. And so many people were afraid of losing their income that they just took whatever they could possibly get. And then they would just try not to complain about it, even though they were gritting their teeth through it the whole way through. And that shouldn't always be the case. I'm not saying that work should be, quote unquote easy, or that, people, shouldn't be thankful to have jobs, but jobs should also be thankful to have workers, and they should be treated as such and they should be paid as such. And I feel as though employers in this country have gotten a little too comfortable treating their employees like crap and paying them as little as humanly possible. And I am glad to see that people are now standing up for themselves. And I hope that more people will take an opportunity to go out there and support these workers by sharing these stories. We can share other things on social media besides memes and horoscope nonsense and whatever's going on with the Squid Game. Let's post some real stuff on social media for a change, everyone. Just, you can take a break, post some real stuff occasionally. So that's my final pitch to everyone. Please share this information, share this episode, share it on Facebook. For those of you who are still active on Facebook, Facebook is definitely, unfortunately, because I know how we all feel about Facebook, but it is still the largest social media platform out of all the major ones. So TikTok hasn't overtaken it yet. So share this on Facebook, where the most people are. But with all that being said, I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode today. We will be back very shortly with a new episode. So as always, stay tuned. And if you are not already, please hit that subscribe button so that you do not miss the next episode of Independent Thought. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good week.